hard evidence that Trump has a problem going towards November. Several states into this Republican primary, we can see a large number of Republicans who are turning out as an actual fact on an ongoing basis in this election year. Many of those Republicans don't want Trump. Here's how Governor Haley put it on Saturday night.
He, as a Republican incumbent, didn't get 40% of the vote of the primary. He's not going to get the 40% if he is not willing to change and do something that acknowledges the 40%. And why should the 40% have to cave to him? 40% is not some tiny group.
As you can see, Haley, at more than one stop, hitting this 40% point. And we're going to broaden this out for you right now. When you look at those key states that we just had, South Carolina most recently, New Hampshire before that, 400,000 plus Republicans looked for something other than Trump. And the Haley voters in her home state here are telling pollsters they will not vote for Trump if he's the nominee. These are active Republican primary voters. There's also the larger group of voters that Trump alienates who may stay home or leave the party altogether. So it's a measurable problem for Trump. It's math. And while his most loyal allies are joining him in just denying that math and reality, like Fox's Sean Hannity, I can tell you tonight that Fox's sister company, the Murdoch-owned Wall Street Journal, has a different view about dealing with these actual facts, and they are coming from the perspective of people who want Republicans to win the general election, to defeat Biden. They're sounding the alarm over these results I'm mentioning. They're telling the financial conservative audience over there that the results show a divided Republican Party heading towards a November where Trump won't beat Biden without Haley's voters. It goes beyond Haley versus Trump. She is simply the last Republican opponent standing. But even if you put that feud to the side, about 20% of Republicans currently oppose Trump for president in November. 1 in 5 Republican primary voters saying they won't vote for him if he is the nominee. And that shows Trump has not won over his own party, even as opponents drop out. That he's in a weaker spot than most candidates who are on a path to nomination, as he may be. Now, the reasons are obvious. He's faced months of public damning evidence about his conduct, which is part of those 4 indictments. And that turns off many Republicans, as well as independents. Then there's that major fraud loss, which was a big story. These are not things that win skeptics back over. The best headlines that Donald Trump has gotten come from horse race media, which sometimes seems to forget that the bar is different here. This isn't some random race among unknown candidates. This is a former president. Former presidents or current presidents are supposed to handily win their party's nomination. So even this mixed picture on Saturday, which I just showed you the numbers on, and I showed you the Wall Street Journal response on, was covered initially largely as a kind of crushing blow to Haley, whom he easily beat. And here's the point. That is true as far as it goes. Haley is losing this primary so far, including in her home state. But to only use sort of one prism and the fixation on the nomination path, that expected victory, may obscure Trump's larger problems. So, again, we're in a world where people say we learn from history, we learn from polling, we learn from the narrative, but then the horse race thing kicks in. Here's how the early TV coverage sounded.
Donald Trump trounced Nikki Haley in her home state.
Another decisive win for former President Donald Trump.
A big win over the weekend for former President Donald Trump.
Donald Trump will win the South Carolina Republican primary, defeating former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley in her home state.
He easily trounced, though, the state's former governor, Nikki Haley.
That's what a lot of people are hearing. Trouncing or not, the larger story here is actually what's striking. Not a former president who has all of these advantages winning, but the problems he's facing. Take the nonpartisan AP, which said, yes, Trump is winning big with his base, but not broadening his support. And that's what's different right now. We can actually learn what's happening together in a way that's fundamentally different from, say, last year, when election discussions were limited to vague polls, spin, and hype. Now we're just a couple states in. Now we have actual voters, and because the Republican primary is more contested, we have actual Republican primary voters, and we're learning what they think. And from them and these turnouts, including in New Hampshire, where others can get involved in voting, we see that Trump's losing moderates. He's losing independents. He's losing college-educated voters who tend to vote on a regular basis. An Axios breakdown notes Trump does well with old white election-denying Christians who didn't go to college, but that is not a winning coalition. That is the actual mathematical problem. And as Trump faces these headwinds, and as I mentioned, the Wall Street Journal and others can just see the obvious problem, as pollsters count it up, well, it's a different story among Republican elites. In public, they act like they're in denial. They're falling in line. Trump's handpicked party chair announcing today she has to leave for an even more Trump-friendly MAGA replacement. Trump has a family member in mind. She said Republican donors should help cover Trump's personal legal bills, a stance so extreme that, as I told you last week, the Trump campaign had to walk that back. It's also a big disconnect to be talking up that idea when I just showed you Republican voters say they don't want to vote for Trump if he is convicted. They do actually care about that, some of them, which again is a contrast to what we hear from some of the D.C. pundits. The fact is these first primaries, including what just happened over the weekend, show a Republican Party divided and open to Trump alternatives. It ranges, that share, again, I'm just counting up what we've seen, Trump winning there by between 50 and 60%. So that's 40+% in each of those states that are open to something other than Trump, a far worse showing than the Republican elites falling in line with 96% of all D.C. congressional endorsements. So we can hear the voters. And if you believe the entire Republican Party is, quote, united, which is what Trump claimed on Saturday, you'd have to ignore all the numbers and the data of what actual Republican voters are doing. If you believe that, maybe you believe that Trump sneakers are as great as Air Jordans and can make you jump twice as high. Those sneakers were the punchline on this weekend's Saturday Night Live, where the magical Trump sneakers give their MAGA player the ultimate special power in Donald Trump's arsenal. And that ain't playing better. It's not getting more points. Certainly not winning. The sneakers, as I'm about to show you, gave the player Trump's superpower of lying about losing.
Gordon Dwyer's about to find out that winning...
Come on, man, how'd you miss that?
...is a state of mind.
I didn't miss. It went in.
All right. So you're saying these Trump shoes made you good at basketball?
No, they gave me the power to say I'm good at basketball and then double down on that until people actually start to believe it.
Now he gets whatever he wants.
Mr. Mitchell, everybody's saying I should have your office because my cubicle is a disaster right now.
Well, can I have a minute to gather my things?
Bye-bye.
And he is whatever he says he is.
Excuse me. It's 170.
It's 170. There you have it. Lying about the facts can confuse people. It can make other people believe the lie or lie for you. But in the end, as you see on your screen, it doesn't change the actual reality, including for many Republicans who've been voting with the choice of Trump on the ballot over the last couple weeks. And Trump did get millions of people to follow his lies about losing the last election. But that didn't make him president. Joe Biden is president. It didn't keep many of the people who followed those lies out of prison, where many of them are now spending years for committing crimes based on Trump's big lie. Now, there is a long way till November. Anything can happen. But today's lies about the actual opposition to Trump within the actual voting Republican electorate right now, to say nothing of a general electorate, is not actually a problem that can politically be lied away. Getting high on your own supply, that might hurt the Trump campaign more than a sober reset. So I ask you tonight, is it the shoes? As Spike Lee asked MJ? It's got to be the shoes, right? No, Spike. On the court and on the campaign trail, how you play matters more than what you wear. The only thing that determines a winner is who has the lead when the time actually runs out.